Capital Weekly's Politics on Tap is co-produced by Capital Weekly, the newspaper of California government and politics, and the California Channel, providing California with 20 years of public affairs broadcasting. Funding for Capital Weekly's Politics on Tap is made possible by the generous support of the California cable and telecommunications industry.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Politics on Tap. We always have a great time talking, but it's always more fun when you sit down and join the conversation. I'm here today with Steve Boilard, who's the director of the Center for California Studies at Cal State Sacramento. Is that close?
Close enough.
Okay, that's why I had to look at the notes. Kim Nalder, who's also a California State University. Oh, I butchered that, didn't I? Professor at Sac State, right, and heads the Project for an Informed Electorate. And to my left is Edie Lambert, who's KCRA TV's news anchor. I'm sorry to spring this on you guys, but it happened to me the other day. So we're all from Sacramento. Somebody asked me, okay, I'm coming to Sacramento, what should I do? And I don't think, I'm only asking this because I'm pretty sure the Chamber of Commerce wouldn't have given me an A. So for my answer. So when you guys get asked that question, what do you say?
For me, it really depends on who's asking the question and what people like to do. For instance, when my mom comes to town, we spend a lot of time on the American River Bike Trail. My mom's a biologist. This area is so beautiful, and no matter what time of year you come, there's something glorious to look at along the river, and it always looks different. We do. You know, it's funny you say that. I don't go that often unless we have visitors in town, but my outdoorsy visitors, that's an easy thing to do. Now that we have a toddler, you don't have to drive anywhere. You just, you know, it's 2 minutes away, and it's a fun day.
It always surprises me not to see that listed, like in homes in that area, where it says 5 minutes from the American River Parkway, because it's so, I mean, for biking, for walking, for anything, you know.
I mean, I agree with Edie. It kind of depends on the person. If you have kids, always put them on the train. There's that train that runs along the river, along the.
Sacramento.
And you know, it's a live steam locomotive. How many cities have one of those running?
Willits.
Yeah. Other than Willits.
Yeah, sometimes we'll take people actually to the state capitol because people haven't been to a state capitol before, and there's a nice museum inside, and you know, people who are interested in politics in any way. Or
I've spent so much time there.
You spend too much time
right.
there, right? It's tainted for some people. But sometimes we'll take people down to the Delta wine tasting down
like in
Cortland
last train to Clarksburg or
Clarksburg.
South?
Yeah. It's just a 20-minute drive and to the sugar mill or to out to Bogle, and you're in the middle of the wine region, and it's beautiful, and you have some nice wine tasting, so it's fantastic.
I love the Crocker Museum, and it still amazes me that it now has more display space than the De Young in San Francisco.
Wow.
With this new addition. And wow, this is almost an artful segue, which, as the folks filming this will tell you, is a fairly rare experience. But I just went to the Norman Rockwell exhibit there, and so they had a reproduction of every one of his covers for the Saturday Evening Post.
I think those are originals, actually.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
Okay. And so from like 1919 to, did you go to the exhibit too? Okay, to after Kennedy's, so 1960 something. Mm-hmm. Right. And I was never a Norman Rockwell fan, really, before, until reading the thing that was in that hallway where it said the Evening Post was one of the first publications to actually go to 1 million people. And it was before radio, before television. That's where you got your news. And so if you're doing the cover for the Saturday Evening Post, you're appealing to the world's broadest demographic, right? You have to do something that's universal enough that it touches a chord, right, in each of those 1 million people from whatever backgrounds they come from. And it's a very windy way of saying it makes me appreciate more the medium of television, because it has to reach such, am I saying something that isn't true, such a broad demographic.
Absolutely.
And find content that appeals to, you know, everybody. I don't have to do that on my website. I mean, it's kind of a weird, twisted little subculture that looks at my stuff. But, I mean, isn't it hard to make news judgments based on that broad of a demographic? Or are there certain things that appeal to everybody, you know?
Well, I do think that there are some stories that appeal to everybody. I think that part of it is finding content that you think people will be genuinely interested in. Also, I think that we have some talented storytellers who can make almost anything interesting.
That's a
and
gift.
They can, absolutely, and they can take, and politics, perfect example. If we go to cover a hearing at the Capitol, unlike the work that you did for the San Francisco Chronicle, we also have to find pictures that bring that to life. If you just show a room full of people talking, there's a visual disconnect between what you're talking about and what your viewers are seeing on TV. So for us, we may then need to go to a county health clinic or to a state park or somewhere to bring that story much more to life than to just simply send a camera to a hearing.
Well, it humanizes it too, right?
Absolutely.
Like here, they're talking about, you know, places will close because of these budget cuts. I mean, it's more real, I guess, if you show this place will close or a place like this will close.
Sutter's Fort, and there's children enjoying it, and you see a field trip, and you see the way that park is utilized. Absolutely.
So the Project for an Informed Electorate, the Center for California Studies, where do Californians get their information? I mean, I'm sort of, you know, I'm an old newspaper man. I'm kind of like the buggy whip salesman at the Sky Car convention, you know.
KCRA, pretty much.
Yes.
Good answer. You'll go far in this business.
Cheers.
I've been doing I teach media and politics, and I've been doing a local TV news study since 2006 with California Common Cause. We've been doing research on the content of local TV news. And it turns out that still, it's just barely shifting over, but local TV news is the primary source for people to get their political information. So it's really important that they tell the stories in a way that does engage people. I mean, the other part of it is that the people who are more sort of political junkie types are tuning into other sources. It's the folks that are maybe on the margin, who may or may not vote, who are tuning into local TV news primarily. And so it's big, it still matters.
That initial sort of message from TV or...
And that transition will take place, and I'm sure everything will be, you know, go more online, and, you know, TV will have to adapt, and newspapers they're trying to adapt now, obviously. But still to this day, it's local TV news. And even the younger people are looking at online versions of things, but they still get the initial story a lot of times because they're the ones covering local politics and state politics, and you don't get that on the national news or on national websites.
And you bring up a good point. We are working to evolve, so we know that our viewers are getting some of their information, let's say, by tuning in at 5 p.m., but also kcra.com. During the last election cycle, we had an election app that was developed by the Hearst Corporation. So it had information. We know people want that information on the go, and so we're evolving too, trying to provide information in a way that people can use it.
I think the other piece of this is it's not just can information get to voters or citizens, which, you know, obviously is important, but the newspapers and television provide more of a mass kind of common conversation where if we're moving more towards the niche-y stuff like you're talking about, people don't have the common information, the common viewpoints that they can kind of play off of. Instead, they're just driving themselves in these very narrow bands that don't really permit as much of a broad conversation. So I hope for the continued evolution of the broader public media as well as a way to kind of keep a public conversation going, not just a bunch of small private conversations.
So can I safely assume that fiscal cliff is out of that broader conversation now? Like we'll never have to hear that again on television or see it in
It's
print?
been replaced by the word
Sequester.
sequestration,
Right.
which is not a TV-friendly word.
I know, it also sounds like something bad that happens to dogs, you know. But can we just talk about that conversation? So, I mean, for Edie's and my benefit, are there certain words that when we hear them that actually mean something else when a politician says them? Like it took me years. Well, yeah. I mean, it took me years before I stopped using the word reform as sort of a neutral word because, like, my idea of reform can be your idea of the end of the world. Yeah,
Right.
So, I mean, are there words?
Well, tax isn't a neutral word any longer, right? If you're in favor of them, then they're revenues, and if you're opposed to them, they're taxes. I'm serious. I mean, I think it's no longer a neutral term. Abortion isn't a neutral term any longer. Pro-life is hardly even a new, they're all kind of adopted by sides of arguments. So I think we do lose that kind of common language.
Yeah, this is one of the challenges I have my media students do, where we take a story and I ask them to try to construct a version of it that is using only neutral language. And they try, but the neutral language that they think is neutral, another student will read it and say, oh, that's not neutral. It's an incredible challenge for people who are trying to do objective reporting, or us for the Project for an Informed Electorate. We're trying to provide information that's not slanted in some way, but so much of the terminology is loaded and employed by politicians purposely for that reason. Frank Luntz, his whole career is coming up with terminology that'll be favorable to his point of view.
We just had this come up last week. We had a political discussion with a Republican and a Democrat. We called one of them a Republican, I think was the strategist, and the Democrat I think we called an analyst. And a viewer wrote in and said, aren't they serving the same function? Why would you call them something different? And that sparked a newsroom conversation, and we did actually change our policy and the way that we're going to label them. But it's interesting, words are powerful, and they have nuanced meanings. And in our case, it was unintended. It was just sort of something that evolved without a lot of discussion.
Is one materially different than the other? Like if you called one an operative, that's got a pejorative sort of.
But I would say maybe a strategist and an operative are somewhat similar, where an analyst could come across as being more objective than a strategist might be perceived as being. So I do think the words matter.
Like a nonpartisan legislative analyst?
Legislative strategist's office.
Yeah, so. I mean, what are words that I think of as neutral that aren't really, or
Well, there are all kinds of examples of terms that have been changed purposely because they had a particular point of view, like.
I still haven't found a substitute for manhole yet. Did you see this? It was in the national, the state legislators' homepage, and I've forgotten which state it is now, but they're trying to make gender neutral their codes. And that's one.
They're stuck on manhole.
Yeah, right. Well, they can't really find one for it. I mean, you can sports enthusiast, a hunter, or a sportsman becomes a sporting enthusiast, but anyway,
Police
I'm
officer,
sorry to interrupt.
firefighter, all of
precisely,
those.
right.
Yeah. So.
Male nurse is always my favorite, because it's already assumed to
assumed
be
that the
female, so you have to
default
put
is
male
female.
in front of it.
Exactly.
Well, I forget who it was, but somebody was saying, when did everyone become an actor? Like, what's wrong with being an actress?
Right. We degenderize all those terms to make, but climate change. Is it climate change or is it global warming? Climate change is the more.
So it seems wimpier to me than global warming. Global warming sounds bad.
Global warming was interpreted by people to mean that if it's ever cold, then it can't be happening, and so they've adapted it to climate change. There are dozens of
change
examples.
sounds neutral to me. That climate change sounds more neutral than global warming.
But I think what Kim is saying is that it expands. The premise with global warming is that you're seeing extremes on both ends of the spectrum, and climate change would indicate both ends, not just the warming.
Switching gears, do we have an informed electorate? I would think Californians. I would think Californians would be, based on the information at hand or available, more informed than other electorates elsewhere.
Well, that's why I called
But
this
maybe
the
that's just
project for
jingoistic, but-
an informed electorate instead of the informed electorate, because it's a future hope rather than a current reality. When you look at polls in California that measure knowledge, and we've done a few of those, knowledge levels are not especially high, and this is true nationwide in all sorts of political science studies of knowledge. Levels are not especially high.
Knowledge being.
So knowledge. So you can measure it different ways. So sometimes you'll do like civics book kind of questions. How many years is a term in the House, or which party controls the legislature? Those kind of questions, and you'll get less than 50% who can answer those kind of questions correctly. Even which party is more conservative than the other, you'll get less than half on national polls. So the things that we take for granted, people who are tuned into politics all the time take for granted, a lot of the electorate, or a lot of the population at least, is not aware of. So it's something to aspire to and something that we're trying to work on.
And a piece of this that I think is really important, there's a lot of drive these days for a more higher voting rates, for example, more participation by the electorate. And I think it's possible that you could actually make worse public policy decisions, worse election outcomes if you just mobilize everyone to vote without them being informed and educated. Because then they're much more susceptible to just being easily manipulated by other stations than KCRA.
And don't you feel like that is particularly true in California, where we have this initiative process with some very complicated, and that, Kim, is where I find your research so interesting, that people are being asked to make very complicated budget decisions with what you're finding to be astonishingly limited information.
Yeah, and there was
or very tailored 15-second or 30-second messages.
Right, that are misleading,
And the
that are
worst part
misinformation.
is they think they're understanding the issue, so they may not even be seeking out more information because they think they're informed.
Well, the PPIC has a new poll just out, and one of the questions they asked was, would you trust budgetary decision-making being in the hands of the people or with the governor and the legislature? And it was almost 75% that said the people. So they prefer to do it through this initiative process, which we know is a mess. Because you're not looking at the big picture and trade-offs.
I think it's one of those, I prefer to do that until, I actually have to do it.
And I don't, right.
Well,
or until I look at the results, right? That the results are, we end up with all this money that's tied up in ways that we may not have the priorities for, and the trade-offs aren't considered, et cetera.
Dan Walsh had a column the other day kind of on this topic where he said this is kind of a chicken-egg question. Is it the people don't want the legislature to do it because they don't think the legislature is equipped to do it, or is it the legislature has screwed it up so bad that they're forcing the people instead to have to clean up the legislature's problems? In other words, is it this kind of cynicism that's rightly bred by the legislature being unable to act, or is the legislature being unable to act because the people have usurped so much power through initiative process?
Okay, so what do you think?
Kim?
We'll be back right after that.
But seriously, I think one of the base problems is there's an enormous amount of cynicism. If you look at it, you talk about approval ratings, which are, the governor's actually are pretty good right now. The legislature is still pretty low, although not as low as it has been. And I think a lot of this
never exactly up there with
exactly
Lassie or anything.
But they were single digits, and now they're above that at least.
Which is something. But I trace a lot of it back to term limits, and that you just don't have a legislature that's as able to be as engaged and expert as they once had been.
And that the cynicism, that's why we have the initiative process, is this discussion is going on now for decades. I think what's getting more difficult is that the decisions that people maybe thought they might be deciding when we started the initiative process, an example my husband loves to give is, do you want it to be legal to tie your horse up in front of the Grange? Yes or no, up or down vote. And now we're deciding very complicated legal issues that are drafted by lawyers and hard even for other lawyers to read.
Which is the point of representative democracy, right? The whole idea is that people should be able to elect individuals who knows that and can act as experts to craft the right kind of policy. But again, if the people
but then
trust
they're
But the fact that
distrustful of them.
Californians don't want that is an indication that there's a problem with knowledge and with trust.
Yeah, I don't know, not to be I sort of feel that voters tend to do the right thing, like jurors do, often for the wrong reasons. That generally the result is okay. They may not be, completely informed on an issue, but it's sort of like, and we're all like that. Like if something is wrong, like we can't necessarily put our finger on it, but it's like, yeah, that's wrong, and
just give it a gut check and
well,
vote.
yeah, I'm not saying it very well, but
or you take your cues from others, that you kind of look at who's lining up in favor or against something, and then you kind of make a judgment because you trust those proxies who do understand it. So maybe it does work that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive psychology work that actually says that you
I
take
don't know
in
what that is.
studies of the way people think and make decisions. And
No wonder I don't know what it is.
right, it's about thinking. It's complex stuff. But what they find is that people, a lot of times at the end of a process, you can go back and ask somebody, why did you make that decision? They can't tell you, but if you could trace it back, there would be a lot of information coming in that they had forgotten the details of. So it might be cues from other people, it might be something that you read or something that you saw on TV, and altogether it ends up being distilled as, I like that, or I have a positive feeling or a negative feeling towards that. But originally there was data behind it.
So given that, let me throw something else into this discussion. And you said you research local news. We, from our parent company, Hearst Corporation down, have a commitment to political coverage that we can actually quantify. And it's branded Commitment 2012, Commitment 2013, I think also creates a consciousness in our newsroom to provide responsible information. We know it's important in a democracy. And yet, we know that for some of these well-financed initiatives and well-financed candidates that can just carpet bomb our airwaves with the ad campaigns, that a lot of people are getting. We may put fantastic information in our newscasts, but the way they may be deciding their vote is going to be from an ad campaign.
You mean like you guys are drowned out by the
Everybody,
the noise of the ad
everybody
campaign.
may be
Yeah, okay.
drowned out by that. I mean, we're talking, as you well know, tens of millions of dollars spent on influencing vote, and it's very effective.
And that's one of the things that we actually looked at was how much misinformation is coming through in the political ads and how much time is devoted. If you watched a half hour of local TV news and you watched the ads too, you didn't use your TiVo to skip those, but you watched them, how much misinformation would you be getting, and is it corrected in the broadcast, or at least over some period of time, is the broadcast correcting it?
And the broadcast is just one fraction of the television people are probably watching. They're watching Dancing with Stars and, getting political messaging all through other programming.
That's the only place where they might get a little bit of it. And there's not as much. KCRA does a better job than most other channels. They actually do, and actually Univision does a good job too. So they do fact checks and ad watches and all sorts of detailed coverage of local elections too, which is really useful, and you don't get the information elsewhere. But people are getting, studies show that people do get a lot of their information from ads. If you ask people directly, did you get your information from the ad? They'll say, oh, I'm not swayed by those, right? But if you follow the information trail backwards, you find that people are getting their information from those ads.
Your project is combating, it's not so much an uneducated electorate as much as a miseducated electorate.
Yes,
right?
that's a worse problem. It's a bigger concern. And what E was referring to is the Prop 13 study I did a little bit ago, which showed that the people who are...
Prop 13.
The Prop 13. Okay. The Prop 13 study, yeah. If you need anything on Prop 13, go to my piece.
Well, I mean, there have been subsequent Prop 13s after they started renumbering.
Right?
You think, like Montana's Jersey, Yeah,
right. The 1978 Prop 13. And what we showed is that the people who should know more about politics, people who are politically sophisticated, meaning they're more educated, more attentive to politics, et cetera, were more likely to get this Prop 13 question wrong and think that it applied to residential taxes only when in fact it applies to residential and commercial. And people with lower levels of education and all the other measures were more likely to get it right just because they were guessing, because both sounds like a nice option if you don't know better. So that's more of a problem.
No wonder I pick that all the time.
Right? Like you pick the middle option. So if that's going on and the politically sophisticated people are misinformed, that's a much bigger problem than just getting more information out to the electorate. We have to correct it. Yeah, this is a lot. I don't want to Rubio this, but
No, well, I guess I mean, no matter how many times you guys or newspapers do an ad watch, I don't get how you can overcome sort of the constancy of, the message of proponents or opponents. I mean, despite it being misinformed and
And is it our job to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, on some level, it's not. I mean.
But whose job is it then? How will it happen? In the LAO, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, not to get off on the Greg Lucas lecture series, but the whole way that we get information now has changed, right? I mean, a daily news cycle a news cycle for a newspaper used to be, when I started, a day. Like I'd go to a press conference, Edie would go to a press conference, you would have something on the air by 6, by noon, whatever it happens to be. I'd write a story that would show up in the morning, in the paper, that would appear on your doorstep. And that was it. Like Walter Cronkite, he was the guy because that's where you went to get your news. I mean, now the news comes to us, like we don't go and get it, right?
It's in my phone.
Right, it's in your phone, right. And so, I mean, I was going somewhere with this, I'm certain, but I've lost my way now. But you know, I guess my point is, do you go to look at sources of information to challenge your preconceived notions, or do you go and reinforce your prejudices?
Well, that's the point I was making earlier. I think we're getting narrower, where we're just living in that narrow band that's just going to reinforce.
Is that because there's too much information and we're scared of learning too much?
I mean, it's available.
It is easy,
right?
It feels good. If you tune into partisan sources that confirm what you believe, it just psychologically feels better than being challenged. And that's a problem.
Okay, how do you get people to challenge themselves like that then?
Certainly education must play a role in that, I think.
Right, we need to teach critical thinking,
Absolutely.
and we need to have people, you know, I challenge my students, of course, to read multiple sources and not take it from one point of view, of course, but multiple sources from different sorts of news outlets as well, international, print, online, TV, whatever. But honestly, most citizens aren't going to do that. That's why we need more objective reporting sources that people trust, because there's a lot of distrust in the electorate right now, and it's worse than it's ever been. And we feel like everyone's a bunch of crooks and we can't trust any sources, and we need more of that sense.
Not to put in a plug for the media, but I mean, I would think in a world where there's an infinite amount of information, that there's, like, our information is better. Like the media's, at least another set of eyes is looking at your work or my work, right? There's somebody that looks at it. You know that on some level it's a little more factual than Bob and Ed's blog on what we think about politics this particular hour.
I think even just within the media, with newsrooms facing cuts and budget problems and in some cases newsrooms folding, that's one thing that we know. The more solid our work is, the more unassailable, the better chance we have of being the emerging newsroom in the market. So that's what we have is that trust. And I think it's probably never, I mean, just in terms of fighting for your own existence, it's never been more important. There's so much information out there. If you can be the source that people trust, and that is earned the old-fashioned way, by doing good work every day, then you'll be the newsroom standing.
Last call.
Well, since it's last call, just briefly, I'm sorry, not to get all groupy or anything, but what was it like to interview the President of the United States? Have you guys met a president?
I have never.
Okay, me either, but...
Sylvia, I've met Gorbachev.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
As close as I come.
You were nervous, right?
I wasn't.
You weren't?
I thought I would be. I was ready to go, and I had actually written out some questions, which I normally don't do at this point in my career. I have a sense of what I'm going to ask. But I thought, boy, just in case I walk in and it's the President of the United States and I'm nervous, I'd better make sure I've got a plan B. Actually, he was very warm, very easy to talk to. I felt like he really listened to the questions that I asked. Clearly, he had his own agenda that he is wanting to promote, doing interviews, but I felt like he worked that in where it was appropriate and made sure that he also answered the questions that I was asking.
Yeah, his style of speaking, I don't know, suggests that he's actually thinking before he opens his mouth and words come out. And it was on the other side of the political spectrum. George Deukmejian, when he was governor, would scare people to death because they'd ask him something and he would sit and not say anything for a few seconds. and people thought he was, irritated or something like that, and he was actually trying
Just
to
thinking
Yeah, right. But it's so alien that people would be like startled by that.
Well, for me, when you asked the nervous questions, it was sort of a milestone in my career. I was much more nervous interviewing Governor Pete Wilson at the beginning of my career than interviewing the President of the United States at this point. And I think because I felt pretty comfortable with my level of knowledge and my research that I had done, and I went in prepared. So I felt pretty comfortable.
Okay.
I don't have a president story, but I've got Edie Lambert's story. And Edie probably remember this, but she had been my student way back when at UCSB. And so I take some responsibility for her success.
She'd probably take some offense to you saying
I'm
way
sure
back
she does.
when.
She didn't want this to be. She didn't want it to be brought. She didn't want to hide this for some
I
time.
must owe you 10%
Yeah.
of
I
a few
think I gave you a
contracts.
gentleman's C, but that's okay.
Let me ask one more thing before we finish. So what are you guys reading? What's on your nightstand?
I'm reading a book on political psychology that, because I'm a professor, that links personality to political behavior, so the way people vote and the way they come up with their party identification. And it's pretty fascinating, the people with certain personality traits, that it may be genetic, that a lot of what we think of as the way we make political decisions may ultimately be genetic via personality.
I mean, it's not genetic that you become a Democrat?
Yes.
Oh.
That's where political
or
science
Republican.
is heading, is neuroscience.
That's scary.
That's fascinating.
We may be out of a job in a way, right? It'll be the biologists who do it all.
Wow.
I'm reading a book called The 4-Hour Work Week, and I haven't.
I'm all for it.
I haven't successfully gotten myself down there yet, but it's an interesting premise. I mean, the guy's basic premise is there's so much that you do during the work week which just really isn't productive, and so there's got to be ways to really simplify that. So I'm trying to employ those. It just means that you free up more time to do valuable things. Well, I think the premise is wrong. The premise is that work's something you want to avoid, which is problematic. But I think that the junky stuff that wastes a whole bunch of time is worth avoiding. So it's a pretty interesting book. Had been a New York Times bestseller for a while, but 4-Hour Work Week, I recommend you. For you, that's like a 50% increase in your work week, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Guess this will be your last appearance here on the show.
I'm just starting 100 Flowers, written by a friend of mine, Gail Tsukiyama. It's a novel set at the beginning of the Chinese Cultural Revolution and tracing one family's path, negotiating that difficult time in history.
And it's like a first-person narrative, or it's a novel?
It's
you
a
said?
novel.
Okay.
She is a fantastic novelist. Samurai's Garden, it was Women of the Silk, or some of her other books. But anyway, just starting it, and I know I'm going to love it because I love absolutely everything she's written. So.
Thanks for joining us here on Politics on Tap. I wish we could spend more time on this conversation. It was so much fun, but you can watch this on calchannel.com, capitalweekly.net, Google it, go to YouTube and watch any of the past conversations and any of the future ones. Hope to see you here next time. And until then, remember to drink and think responsibly.